Hello everyone, this is Bradley. Today this is a fundamental tutorial talking about how to assign materials to objects using animation nodes. You may ask why we need to do this. This is because if I have a large amount of object and I would like to assign different material to each object, then you cannot do this manually. It's just painful. And using animation nodes will be very procedural and efficient. I've made a calendar pages animation and a tutorial in the past. And here is kind of a remaking of the setup I combined with the new methods I have. Just to briefly discuss this. So I have a plane, and you can subdivide that with subdivides, but I just manually subdivided all these kind of things. And I take a shader smooth, and I add two simple deform modifier. So in my last tutorial, I was actually using the single simple deform modifier with an empty to define the origin, but in this case I'm just too lazy, so I just use two simple deform on different axes instead. One is bend, another is twist, whatever. And within animation nodes, I just distribute on a linear place. So let's take the amount into 5. Take to the beginning. So this is how this page has been look like, and you can definitely increase the amount. Be remember to change the size so that the interval does not change, because you don't want your calendar page to be too thick or too thin or whatever. Or you can use a step, but when you increase the amount, it will just be horrible. And instance the object, copy full object so that it copies the modifier and assign them to the locations. And the next part is very important. When is the offset? Because I would like to move these calendar pages as the time goes. They have been blown by the winds, and I'm, instead of using the object controller for as I have done in the past, this time I'm using a delay for. Delay for is basically, you can read more things in menu. The link is provided in the description. But basically it's just first object will be delayed 5 seconds, 5 frames. Second object 10 frames. Third object 15 frames accumulation. But their action will always span 50 frames. So you can, which means you can change, it's like the keyframe. You can actually decide the interval from the keyframe 1 to keyframe 2, so that you have a very slow movement, which you cannot really achieve using the object controller, or at least not that easily, considering the fact that their evaluation is just so tiny. Another thing is you can actually manage the delay so that maybe you can have a very fast animation, but a very long delay. But this is not realistic, so I'd like just to take that 5 and 50. So now I have a calendar animation, everything being blown up. So I also, despite the offset matrices, I also need to control the simple deform. So I put that evaluate for. I'm using one evaluation, but put them into 2 map range so that controlling 2 different simple deform. Object attribute output is something that I've discussed in a separate tutorial. If you're unsure, you can go to the right upper corner. The information has been provided. And because I don't want to, I cannot do all this complicated conversion between radian and degree, so I have to use a convert angle node. It's kind of very simple. Once you get all these kind of things, just you get the animation. The only thing that we are actually lacking is the material, because if you look at the materials, there's just nothing. It's just white pages. Okay, so we need to deal with this. And calendar pages all have different pages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until 28, and so on and so forth. All right. So in such a kind of case, you are not able to assign materials one by one. It's just painful. And what if, more important thing, as I always said to people, is what if I decided to, oh, I don't want 22 pages, I want 15 pages. So I'm deleting material, deleting object until I regret, okay, I think 15 is not enough, I would like to increase object. Then you have to not only to redo all the materials, but also do more materials. It's just kind of painful. You have to manage all these kind of things. That's why using animation nodes is really, really helpful in this kind of case. But anyway, so how to actually assign different materials. What we need to do is you need to make sure that you have the image that you need. So let's select probably height, and we go to the imports image as planes. If you don't not have these buttons, you go to edit preference and it goes to the image, goes to the add-on, and it goes to the image as planes. This is a built-in add-on, so you should get that. And get the import image as planes. And we are having all these kind of calendar pages, and you can import them and immediately get a result. So once you get all these kind of calendar pages, we're not going to use them. We just need material of them. So what we do is we need to get all material of all these calendar pages. So we're going to take the object material input, and we're going to take a collection info. So we're getting all these kind of objects in the height. So we take the objects into the place, and it does not receive multiple inputs, which means you need a loop and so on and so forth. In this case, I think material inputs list. So I made a preset specifically for this function. So you just put objects into place. So kind of saving your work. You can download preset library from the link in the description. It's completely free. So once we have all this kind of material list, we need to assign the material. The object material output node also cannot receive multiple inputs, which means we need to use the, I think we use the each. So each object receive a different material instead of they sharing the same material. So once you've done that, it does not really change anything. You can see all this kind of calendar is still showing the March 25th. The reason is because material is a mesh data that you need to enable the deep copy. So that's now we can see there is a 15, but behind that there's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So everything is in order, and we finished this. Okay, this is done. Here I want to remind you one thing. It's basically kind of a limitation, as you probably see that already. Once we are using the import the image texture as planes add-on, it will automatically create a kind of shaders with color into color, alpha into alpha. And if you go to the object settings or material settings, there's a blending mode automatically switched to alpha blend, because this is the only way to make alpha works. And this add-on definitely help us to solve this problem. But an unfortunate thing is this is kind of Eevee limitation. Once you have this alpha blend, sometimes you just have this kind of weird bugs. I don't think there is a way for me to actually solve that, because you cannot manipulate, you cannot change this blending modes to multiple objects very easily. So if you know the methods, please tell me, because it will be really helpful. But in this case, Eevee is almost unusable to render this kind of animation, unless you do not care about all this kind of bug. So you need to switch to cycle. Once you go into cycles, immediately all this kind of bug will be solved. So there is no seeing through alphas. Everything just looks nice and normal. And the shadow is correct, much better than Eevee, despite the issue that it's just so slow. Okay, here we are working with calendar pages, so everything is in numerical orders. So after March 17th, I have March 18th. Everything is in order. So this is a setup that only contains 3 nodes, including 2 presets. But in other cases, if you're playing poker games, or you are placing photos on the cardboard or whatever stuff, then you don't want them to be in order, or sometimes you just don't want them to be in order. In such kind of case, we need to use some more advanced changes. Here we're in another example. This is basically the same setup, despite the fact that we no longer doing the calendar page animations. It's just instancing objects with all this kind of assigning different materials. Let's look at the image texture we have. These are all photos that I took from Pixabay so they are Creative Commons 0. And just to know with this amount of photos, you can actually change the blending mode manually. So once you fix that, it goes to noding. So we no longer have the issue in the shadings, and the setup is pretty straightforward. I'm going to use, I have a plane. This is just an elongated plane that contains one single materials, and by using the animation node, I'm actually rewriting their materials as we have done with our calendar pages. Here you do realize a problem. I have about 16 photos in total being instanced, and you can definitely change the amount as you wish. But we originally have 5 photos in the hide collection, and once the first time all this kind of photo has been used up, the only result we're getting is the first photo being repeatedly used over and over again. Okay, this is, I don't think this is what you want. You obviously see some issues. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to imagine there is a kind of, you're in a bar, and there is usually kind of a board that posting all these kind of photos as a memorial moment in the bar or other things. Or sometimes they post advertisements or whatever. So in this case, we need to actually repeat this entire list. So now we have more objects than the materials. So we need to repeat the repeat list. There's 2 nodes. One is called repeat list, and the other is called repeat list elements. I don't want to go into details about their differences, but usually I just suggest you to use the repeat list unless there's specific case that you need. And once you put the repeat list, immediately you get things normal. It's not necessarily too nice, but it gets what you want. And I would suggest you to keep the length, so that not over generating materials, because if you just take the amount, then sometimes you just over generate materials. It does not really run the loop very bad, because the loop will be cut by the amount of objects, but it just it does not look right. So a way to really fix this is to put the list length that you generated from this distributed matrices into the length. So you are generating exactly the same amount of materials for your objects. So if you have 16 objects, you have 16 materials, one by one, everything corresponding to each other. Very nice. In this case, we also still see kind of orders of all these kind of objects. As you can see, there is a rule. If you're working with pokers, then this is definitely not what you want. You want to randomize everything. In this case, there is another node which is called get random list element. Put the list into list. Okay, and again we are getting the issue of the amount that we need to manage. In such a kind of case, still doing the same, put the list length into the amount. I also want to remind you, if you're doing these get list elements, it will pick one. Every object within the list will be only picked up at one time. So if you have very few materials, then it will run out of materials, and it will cause the same bugs as previously. You're just repeating the first element over and over again until you really fill up all this kind of lists. Okay, and once you've done this, you can actually change the seed, so everything has been randomized. This is really a very good example if you're working with pokers and so on and so forth. Earlier, I have mentioned that these are photos, but in reality, the photo does not look like this. At least in my opinion, if I have kind of white frames around the photos, it more looks like a photo instead of just an image. Okay, so in such a kind of case, what should we actually do with this thing? It's very tricky. Here is just going to tell you basically the method. So originally I'm instancing this plane. It's just pure photos. Okay, but now I'm generating a new plane. This plane actually has been inset inner and I have assigned two materials. The center, so let's just go to the phase selection mode. The center is assigned to one materials, and I'm hitting Control I to reverse the selection and assign the second material. The material does not really matter in this case because we will overwrite the materials anyways, but the assignment is very critical. So basically, we can definitely use the photos, but before I do that, I want to talk about the secret within this object material each. So basically, this is everything is based on whether it's object material shared or object material each. They are always based on this object material output. The only difference is the issue with this node, however, is that I cannot put a plural into singular. It have to generate an object list element instead of converting the object into plural. So we always need to use a loop. So in that case, the difference between object material each and object material shared is whether this material list is in iterator or parameter. In this case, this is a very special case because we need to put multiple material on a single object. Actually, this is a feature which is available for the object material output. So it's possible to receive multiple material, but for a single object. So here, instead of using object material each, we're just going to put the material into. And then we need to put the two materials into this material socket to fill two sockets. So we need a material list. And I also need a material. The reason there is a difference because the white frame is always a white frame, but the center is something that we really need to change. So once we have this, we simply just put our center graphics into the list, and the rest is white. Okay. And then I need to break down this list into a single element. So get list element, index into index, material list. So for each loop, I'm picking up one element from this entire list. So originally, this contains multiple materials. Basically, all the materials we have, but now I'm only filtering out to one for each loop. So basically, a way to replace the, how should I say, to replace the iterator and create material list, because we are going to put two materials to our object. If now we look at the object that we instance, there's only one material being put. But now after creating a list, I'm generating two materials. The issue is that the object data, the polygon data or the kind of assignment hasn't been made to our object or to our instances. And by doing the deep copy and copy for object, it does not really help, which means we need to use mannual method to actually assign the polygons. So here, let's go to the polygon mode because we want to know the index of polygons. If we go to polygons and select the object, we can see the polygon, and then we see a 0. Actually, we need to re-update the photos. So let's select the photo again. So we have the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which means we only need to know the 0 because it's the center. So there is a node which is called object, the polygon material index. In computer, the index always start from 0. So the 0 is the first, 1 is the second. It's just a rule. So in this case, material index means I'm using the first material. So I'm going to fill the 1, 2, 3, 4 as the white frame. Let's create an integer list. Create integer list. And I need 5 faces. So the first is 0. The rest are all 1. other material index, and immediately we get all these white frames. So this is done. Another thing I want to remind you is that you can definitely deform the scale of objects either randomly or whatever, so that it get more variation, and also randomize the location and so on and so forth. There are many other things that you can do, but I don't want to go too much in detail. But just to know, there is a side effect is that once you are working with this kind of object, you cannot directly correct the UV. So the photo image might be distorted. If it's a kind of small scale distortion, I don't think it will be too much of a problem, because either way, I think these photos will be in the background. No one will really care. Otherwise, you may need to do some more stuff to fix this kind of issue. But I don't want to go into such in details. I think this tutorial should really finish here. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll probably see you next time. Bye bye.